Today I'm going to show you the whole process for baking 2 loaves just like these and share with you 5 tips that took my baking from a bit up and down to pretty consistent. If you're new to sourdough or looking to improve, I hope these tips help you too. Let's get started. So the very first thing we're going to have to do is wake up this starter. This starter has been sitting in the fridge for a couple of weeks now, so we're going to have to activate it and get the fermentation process going.
To activate the starter, I'm adding 50 grams of starter with 30 grams of lukewarm filtered water and giving it a nice mix. Now I'm adding 25 grams of organic white wheat flour. And here's tip number 1. Add 5 grams of rye flour as well. The rye flour really boosts the starter activity. This has made a massive difference to the activity and the bubbliness of my starters. Now give that a good mix and add a marker at the top of your starter like an elastic band so you can see how much it has risen later. And we're already at tip number 2. If you're in a cool climate, place your starter in an ice box or something similar with a hot water bottle. Don't just leave it on the side. This has been a game changer for me.
Well, it's been 10 hours or so since we put the starter into the icebox. As you can see here, it's more than doubled. We're going to use this now to create our leaven, which is what we're going to use to create our dough tomorrow.
Here we're using 50 grams of starter, 100 grams of lukewarm filtered water, and mixing it together really well. Now we're adding 100 grams of organic white wheat flour. Carry on mixing. Again, add a marker so you can see how much it has risen later.
All I'm going to do now is leave this on the counter overnight. Well, it's now 9 o'clock in the morning. This leaven is looking great. Look how much that has risen. It's more than doubled. The next stage of the process is called the Autol, which is essentially the start of our dough making.
For the Autol process, we're going to measure out 200 grams of leaven, move the remaining leaven to a smaller jar, seal tightly and pop it in the fridge for use later. Add 700 grams of lukewarm filtered water and whisk together. Add 50 grams of organic wholemeal flour and add 950 grams of organic white wheat flour. And here's tip number 3, make sure you're mixing as you go. I start off with a whisk, then when it gets a bit thick, I use my hands. Mixing as you add the flour really helps get the lumps out. Before I started doing it this way, the dough was a lot harder for me to get less lumpy. So get any and all lumps out that you can feel and mix until the flour is mixed in. No need to knead the dough. Scrape off the excess on your fingers with a spoon or some other tool. Cover with a wet tea towel and leave on the counter for about 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, we're going to have to add our salt. Sprinkle 20 grams of salt over your dough, wet your hands and keep a bowl of water handy. Press your fingers down into the dough, pushing the salt in. Squeeze gently, but not too hard as you don't want to break the gluten forming, and really work that salt in. You can also pull the dough over itself like I'm doing here. Now put a wet tea towel over it. And here's tip number 4, place in a cold oven or microwave with a hot water bottle. Set a timer for 4 hours and one for 30 minutes. We're going to stretch and fold the dough 4 times at 30-minute intervals. To stretch and fold our dough, we're going to grab the dough from the bottom of the bowl and gently stretch over the top of the dough. Repeat 4 to 6 times, each time turning the bowl 90 degrees until the dough feels firmer and doesn't stretch anymore. Be careful not to pull the dough too hard, as this will end up breaking the gluten network that is developing here. Now take your dough out of the oven, tip your dough onto a work surface, no need to dust it. Get some flour on your hands though. Now use a dough scraper or similar instrument to cut the dough into 2 pieces. Now I'm going to shape the dough with the dough scraper. Essentially what I'm trying to do here is turn the dough under itself to create tension on the surface. It should start to feel tight. Do this for both bits of dough, then rest them on the work surface for 30 minutes. Now we're going to shape again. Sprinkle white flour on the work surface and top of the dough. Flip it over using the dough scraper. Don't worry about getting a bit rough. Carefully stretch into a rectangle, try not to break it, fold it into the middle and then again. You can give the edges a bit of a firm down too. Now fold in again from the sides, pick up the corners into the middle, now flip it. With your hands tuck it into a firm ball. Use the dough scraper to lift it and flip it upside down into the proofing basket, then sprinkle with some more rice flour. Let it rest for an hour, put it in a plastic bag and leave in the fridge overnight. Alright, it's showtime. Preheat your oven and Dutch oven for about 30 to 60 minutes. Set the oven to 250 degrees Celsius or 482 Fahrenheit. When your 30 to 60 minutes is done, get your dough out of the fridge. And here is tip number 5. Flip onto baking paper, which is cut into this round shape about the size of your proofing basket and with 2 straight parts that work as handles. Score the bread right away. You don't want to hang about here. You want to score pretty much as soon as the dough is out of the fridge, as cold dough is much easier to score. Make at least 1 deep cut and whatever decoration you want. Place in the Dutch oven, careful not to burn yourself. Now bake with the lid on for 20 minutes, then remove the lid and the baking paper and lower the temperature to 220 degrees Celsius or 428 degrees Fahrenheit. Just had to Google that one. Remove from the oven and the Dutch oven and place on a cooling rack for 1 hour. It's tempting to taste the fresh bread right away, but try to be patient as the loaf will lose moisture if you cut it too soon. Now, it would be remiss of me not to give a shout out to this book by Elisa Gusela. Most of you, like me, won't be able to read it as it's in Finnish. Luckily for me, I have an in-house translator. Most of the things I mentioned in this method come from here. Good luck getting a hold of a copy though. It seems only to be sold in Finland.
Well, I think it's about time we cut one of these open and take a look. I think that's pretty good. What do you think? Well, I hope these tips help elevate your sourdough game as much as they did mine. But don't get me wrong, there's still room for improvement. So if you've got your own tips, feel free to drop me a comment below. Likewise, if you've got any questions. We're in this sourdough game together, people. Cheers.